Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Esa enai el harim me'ain yavo ezri Esa enai El harim me'ain yavo ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz.
As we join together to remember Edward Feldman this morning, there are often times within our lives where words fail us when we are in the midst of grief, even as we join together to celebrate the life and legacy of someone we loved. And so often in those moments, we turn to the words of our tradition, particularly the Psalms. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help will come from Adonai, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. We turn together to the words of Psalm 23, if you'll join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Grief, we are taught, is the price we pay for having the courage to love others as deeply as we do. And we are also taught that grief is really just love. It's all the love you want to give, but cannot. All that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, that lump in your throat, and that hollow part of your chest. We're taught that grief is just love with no physical place to go. But this morning, we share in these moments of grief and in these sacred moments of memory this celebration of a life well lived. And our grief turns back to love and then to tears, perhaps to laughter and even silence, and then back to love and grief again. Today, our grief will echo through song, through the words of Ed's family, and in sharing that grief, while it may not make the grieving any less painful, perhaps it can at least make it a little less lonely. We will hear words from Ed's immediate family in a few moments, But the measure of Ed's life and legacy goes so far beyond what is shared today. So we extend our heartfelt condolences to you, his immediate family, to Richard and Marco, to Bruce and Wendy, to Beth and Jeff and Marcy, to his grandchildren, Jessica and Sid, Jamie, Matthew, Andrew, Haley, Rachel, Jacob, and Mitchell, to David and Bobby, and of course to Ruth, Ed's beloved wife of 73 years. And as we share memories of Ed, we also see that love continues on, perhaps not in the way we are used to in our physical world, but now in the tender and more gentler world of spirit and memory. Ed was a businessman through and through, entering the family business of wholesale wine and liquor distribution in 1948. I'm told that the running joke is that Ed graduated on a Friday and his dad had him get right to work the following Monday. Ed worked at F&A distributing up until COVID, communicating to the office several days a week. And even in these last few weeks, Beth would still bring him envelopes and work to go through. He was always so sharp and on top of things, and that work was important to him. But perhaps even more important than that was his family. Ed met Ruth on a blind date fix-up and married in 1951. And their relationship, their marriage, was nothing short of a true love story. Ed would often say that Ruth was his sweetheart. They were best friends, but it went so far beyond that. Ed had a deep respect for Ruth and wouldn't make a move or a decision without checking with her and talking it over. They did almost all of their social activities together, and Ruth's dementia was so hard on him too because he simply didn't want to leave her, even to go to dinner or an activity, and they still shared such special moments together. They were both entirely devoted to family, and Ed was a devoted son to his own parents, often schlepping his own kids up to visit, and I'm told Ed and his father would sit and talk business with a boxing match on in the background. It was such a part of their lives. As a father, Ed was just as loving. As Richard shared, he was quiet and gentle, and he and Mom always functioned as a team. He always made it home for bedtime. And I'm told that Ed would often go home for lunch in the early days of his marriage, so much so that his colleagues at work would poke fun at him. But when the kids were born, Ed stopped going home in the middle of the day, figuring it was probably better to not know what was happening at home with 4 little ones running around. But in all seriousness, Ed loved to be around his family, and he and Ruth traveled extensively with their kids and friends, including 12 major multi-generation trips all over the world. Ed and Ruth played bridge. They'd go to an annual film festival in Tarrytown, and Ed followed the Phillies and Eagles and would often take each of his children to a game every year. He loved to read, especially mysteries, and as a family, his children recalled going to the Cherry Hill Library and bookstore at the mall, the Book Trader in Philadelphia, and Marcy shared the memory of being in their family room growing up, where everyone was just reading a book. Ed and Ruth together loved entertaining and hosting gatherings. They had an extensive social circle, and as more people joined their family, it always felt like one big family, as more and more people were included. In the early days, as they were raising a family, their social life centered around their synagogue community, Beth Jacob. Ed was a regular at the Monday morning minyan and would frequently be called to some other days as needed. But when Beth Jacob, Beth Israel became Makor Shalom, Ed and Ruth were fixtures there, always generous supporters of the synagogue year after year. And it was at Makor Shalom when I first arrived in the community, where I met Ed and Ruth 15 years ago. We had gotten a call that Ed was in the hospital, and I went to visit. I was fresh out of rabbinical school and didn't know many people at the synagogue. And I distinctly remember how warmly Ed welcomed me into his hospital room, with the kindest, warmest, and most gentle smile I had ever experienced. And I remember sitting there at his bedside as we talked. I always looked forward to seeing them at services, particularly at the High Holy Day season. And as soon as I would hear Ed come into the synagogue office, I would quickly wrap up whatever I was doing and head out to talk to him, to catch up on how he and Ruth were doing, what he was up to. And before COVID, he and I would see each other at the Virtua gym, as Ed would usually be walking around and around and around the track every morning, always with that gentle smile and the warmest greeting. He made you feel instantly at home. His family shared similar sentiments. As Jeff said, he was just so welcoming. And while he was quiet, when he did talk, people listened because you knew what he was going to say was something of substance. He was always interested in learning about what you were interested in, and he was someone who cared deeply about his extended family, including Jeff's own parents. In fact, as you shared recently, Ed called Jeff while watching the digital picture frame that he had because Ed realized there weren't any pictures of Jeff's parents on it, and he asked for him to please upload a few because he missed them. Marco shared similar thoughts of instantly feeling welcomed and loved, being part of the family. Even when he tried to hide behind a large flower arrangement when he met the family for the first time, Marco said, and I quote, that nearly immediately, the flowers went away and the hugs came. Ed was accepting and attentive, always wanting to know about Marco's culture. And when Marco's mom was visiting from Brazil, Ed was concerned about finding a paper from Brazil so that she would have something to read while she was here. Bruce talked about how his sense of family extended far beyond the local South Jersey area and how he was always there with unconditional support. Wendy added, he was welcoming from day one. He was a beautiful, beautiful person. And Beth talked about how he was always an open-door guy, not only at work but at home too, someone you could always go to. Marcy shared he was a non-judgmental person and was always so supportive through all kinds of situations. He also loved and adored his grandchildren. He was so proud of each and every one of you and always wanted to know what you were up to. Ed lived the value of L'Ador Vador, of passing tradition, the importance of Judaism and family from one generation to the next. Less than a month ago, Ed helped to host a Seder for 60 family members. He was the patriarch of your family, and it meant so much for everyone to be together. And the picture you showed me of all the generations of your family celebrating together is something to be treasured. And finally, when I asked Ed's family what they will miss the most about him, a few of the things you mentioned were weekends spent getting together, just talking about anything and enjoying family meals, just being able to pick up the phone to talk to him and having his unconditional support, family dinners and him asking what was going on at work. And Marcy concluded, knowing that he was always rooting for me and how he would always be my biggest fan. But perhaps this moment was summed up by all of you when you shared, and I quote, I think my father felt like he lived a great life, and while it was not always easy, he really enjoyed that life. And while Ed himself wished for a couple more years, he has left behind a family with such strong connections, a wife whom he adored and loved for over 7 decades, and a life worthy of celebration and now rest. Zichrono livracha, may his memory always be for a blessing.
We are gifts And we are blessings, we are history in song. We are hope, and we are healing. We are learning to be strong. We are words, and we are stories. We are pictures of the past. We are carriers of wisdom, not the first and not the last. Ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, we protect this chain. From generation to generation, Ledor vador, these lips will praise your name. Looking back on the journey that we carry in our hearts, from the shadow of the mountain to the waters that would part, we are blessed and we are holy. We are children of your way. And the words that bring us meaning, we will have the strength to say. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, we protect this chain. From generation to generation, Ledor vador, these lips will praise your name. Ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, you protect this chain. From generation to generation, Ledor vador, these lips will praise your name.
We'll now hear some memories from members of Ed's family. We begin with his son, Richard.
On behalf of my entire family, I want to thank you for being with us today. I'm speaking for my siblings, Bruce, Beth, and Marcy, as well as our spouses, Marco, Jeff, and Wendy. Dad would be very touched that you joined us to celebrate his life and say farewell. Dad had 97 very good years, and while we hoped for more time together, it was not meant to be. I want to tell you about his life with some anecdotes that you may or may not know, but which hopefully will tell you more about Dad. Dad was the youngest of 4 sons. He was born in Bayonne, New Jersey, to Annie and Max Feldman in 1927. From his stories, I got the sense that he had pretty tough parents, but my father loved them and respected them. 2 anecdotes that he liked to tell particularly come to mind about Dad's early life. His mother every year made him a chocolate cake for his birthday, and when he turned 8, he refused to eat the cake. His mother threatened that she would never make him another chocolate birthday cake, but he must have had his reasons, and he refused to eat it. And she never made him another chocolate cake. And as my cousin Allison, paraphrasing her father, Dad's brother Myron, said, "Brother Edward famously has a stubborn streak." So Dad and Uncle Mike shared a room growing up. Dad referred to him as my big brother Myron, and Uncle Mike referred to him as my brother Edward. One particular activity that they loved was to go to their father's movie theater, the DeWitt Theater in Bayonne, New Jersey, to see cowboy movies. Later in life, he continued to love the movies, and as you heard, went to a film festival every year on New Year's Eve for many years. Their two older brothers, Manny and Matty, were significantly older and were role models and heroes to Dad. Both became physicians, both served in the military during World War II. Uncle Manny received the Silver Star after serving in Europe. Myron Altschuler was a close friend of my father when they were growing up. My father used to tell us stories that they would take the ferry to New York City. They would start in Lower Manhattan, walk all over New York City, and end up up in the northern part. The Altschulers became lifelong friends and business partners to the Feldmans. Another story my father loved to tell was about his father. When he and Mom were honeymooning in California, Dad was offered the opportunity to stay there and become an accountant to the stars. When he called to relay this to his father, the short, emphatic reply was, "I will see you in the office Monday." And Dad, being the good son, was in the office on Monday. After graduating from the Wharton Business School in 1948, he remained in the Philadelphia area and then married Mom in January of 1951. They met on a blind date orchestrated by Uncle Mike's sister-in-law, who knew a cousin of Mom's. Dad almost didn't graduate from Wharton. He had never learned to swim as a child, and at that time, Wharton required all students to pass a swimming test to graduate. So Dad took swim classes. After several unsuccessful attempts to pass the test, they told him that he would graduate, but he needed to teach the next one, which he did. My father's life centered around family, work, and friends. When he and Mom married, her family became his. He loved the cousins clubs and the times they spent together. I remember him taking Bruce and me on a few deep-sea fishing trips with Mom's brother David and Mom's uncles. I don't recall that we caught many fish, but we had a great time eating all the food that they packed. Dad and Mom were a team. He always consulted her before making any major decision. They both grew up valuing education and passed that value on to their children and grandchildren. They stressed the importance of family and being together. Marcy recalls there were times growing up when we were all in one room reading, but we were always together. I don't doubt that my father would have done anything that Mom wanted him to. For instance, she convinced him to take bridge lessons, and playing bridge became a major part of their social life for a while. And while he was a good gin rummy player, when it came to bridge, he used to come back from their bridge games complaining about sore shins and how many times she had kicked him under the table for a bridge hand that had gone awry. For many years, for the first night of Passover, we would drive up to Uncle Manny and Aunt Florrie's home in Hollis Hills, New York. He braved long car trips with 4 young children through the traffic of the Lincoln Tunnel or George Washington Bridge so we could celebrate the holiday with his brothers and their families. After Aunt Florrie passed away, he and my mom hosted an annual Feldman family Seder at our home for several years, and as you heard, eventually they started hosting a Seder for both sides of their families and friends at a local hotel. They did this for over 20 years. At the end of April, just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated Passover, and the Seder had 60 family members and friends. He felt so lucky that he and Mom were able to see his children, many of his grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and friends gathered together, and it was so fortunate that he and Mom were able to be there with so many of their family members after the COVID years. During the COVID lockdown, my father struggled how to pass the time besides watching CNN or MSNBC. He started trying to contact old college friends or relatives that he had not seen for many years. He reconnected with Mom's cousins, Elliot and Pauline Suto, and just a few weeks ago, the wife of one of his fraternity brothers called him to say hi. He and Mom were godparents to the son of my mother's cousin, Lynn Fruit. They had not had any contact with Ben for many decades. Several months ago, my father was finally able to contact Ben. They had had several phone conversations. Both were looking forward to meeting again later this summer. And he really went out of his way to figure out how to get hold of Ben, who he hadn't talked to for many, many years. Some of my childhood memories of Dad include activities that we did together: bowling, going with the Sherwoods to play touch football, going to watch the Eagles games at Franklin Field with the Gantz family. On the weekends, we would throw a baseball or a football at the yard. When I started to play golf, we would go together to the driving range. Dad was never a great golfer. He couldn't decide whether to play right-handed or left-handed. Alan Swartz was his regular golf partner. Dad always said he didn't particularly like golf, but he went because he enjoyed so much the time he spent with Alan. Dad always needed to have dessert at the end of every dinner. After dinner, he would often relax by reading the newspaper, and often could be found resting his eyes while pretending to read, a skill that Bruce and I have learned from him and mastered. Beth and Marcy recall that he liked to wake us up in the morning singing our morning reveille, which was Irving Berlin's song, "Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning." Like the rest of us, he couldn't carry a tune. He took violin lessons unsuccessfully when he was young, and fortunately, musical talent seems to skip a generation, as some of his grandchildren are blessed with musical talent. Bruce tells a story that Mom and Dad came to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for his graduation from the Air Force Officer Training School. So Dad was driving on base to the graduation site, and all of a sudden the military police come zooming up behind him, sirens going, flashing lights. Turned out he had driven out onto an active runway. Had to be escorted off, which they did, and got him to the right place. A very important theme of Mom and Dad's parenting philosophy was that they gave us freedom to explore our interests and our life paths, but we always knew there was a safety net if things didn't work out as planned. I am particularly thankful to Dad for two very personal reasons. It took me a while to figure out that I wanted to become a doctor. Actually, it took me 4 or 5 years to figure that out. He made it possible for me to have that space and time in my life so I could figure this out without the pressure of having to make a rushed decision about my future. When Marco, my husband, came into my life in 1998, my father and mother loved him and accepted him unconditionally. At Rachel's baby naming, Marco met my parents, siblings, and entire extended family. And what an introduction to the family that was. Dad had a unique relationship with all of his children and grandchildren. He accepted us and our spouses with love and without conditions. He loved asking our spouses about their lives and interests. He was always interested in the lives of those around him. He was interested in what his grandchildren were doing, and he was so proud of all of them. Mom and Dad both loved going to the movies. For many years on New Year's Eve with a group of friends, they attended a film festival run by Judith Crist in Tarrytown, New York, where they had the opportunity to immerse themselves in movies for 3 or 4 days. Dad loved to travel with friends and family. One of their favorite trips was with Shirley and Mary Levin to England and Paris. I had nightmares of them trying to drive on the opposite side of the road in England and around the circle at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. But they succeeded and they came back safely. For many years and until the very beginning of COVID, we traveled as a family every summer. Mom and Dad wanted us to be together to create family bonds and to create the memories of these times together. They loved the photo books of our trips created by Marco and Jeff, how wonderful it was for them to enjoy these books, and for many years after they would go through and look at them and they could see their children and grandchildren growing up and changing over the years. After graduation from Wharton, Dad went to work in the wholesale liquor business, probably the Monday after he graduated. Dad started and became president of Merchants Wine and Liquor in Camden, New Jersey. As the business grew, they moved to Pennsauken and then Mount Laurel. In the late 80s, Merchants merged into F&A Distributing Company. He and big brother Myron and Myron Altschuler became senior partners and eventually were joined by Jeffrey Altschuler, my sister Beth. Today, after another series of mergers, they are now Allied Beverage Group and are the largest wine and liquor distributor in New Jersey and the 10th largest in the country. Dad took a personal interest in each of his employees. He knew their names, often the names of their spouses and children. He was generous with his time and interest in people. His door was always open for his employees to come to him for advice. When this business moved to Carlsbad, Dad and Beth commuted 3 days per week. Beth remembers that they alternated who got to drive and who got to nap, particularly in the afternoons. But they developed a special bond spending so much time together. When the business moved to Carlsbad, he and Uncle Mike started to share an office and had lunch together every day. When they moved again to Elizabeth, they continued to share an office, and they alternated who brought the sandwiches and who brought the dessert. So before they would go up, they always conferred the night before on the menu for the next day and who was bringing what. The office arrangement continued until the COVID lockdown. I loved thinking of my father and his brother sharing a bedroom growing up, and then again, later in life, sharing an office and being able to spend that time together. The relationship changed, and both of them changed as a result of being together. My father continued to work on projects for the Allied Credit Department up until 1 or 2 weeks ago. He remained active on the board of Allied Beverage. He never retired, he just cut back his hours. And even in the hospital, I could hear him muttering about liquor license changes and clean invoicing. So the business was clearly on his mind, even in the hospital. Dad and Mom are generous donors to many organizations and charities, particularly local Jewish organizations and their synagogue. They're incredibly generous, and as generous as they were, my father always worried that they weren't doing enough. He received many requests for donations. He read each one seriously. Most of us would throw them away. He read them, he kept them, he looked at them, and he often donated to many of them. He loved Mom so incredibly much. They were married 73 years. He wanted to be with her to make sure she had everything that she wanted or needed. He asked us, as if he had to ask, or there was a doubt, to be sure that she would be taken care of and could continue to live in their apartment if something happened to him. On Friday last week, Mom came down to the rehab unit to Dad's room, and he was able to hold her hand and give her a kiss and spend some time with her. At the time, we had no idea that would be his last day. I hope all of Dad's grandchildren, Jessica, Jamie, Matthew, Andrew, Haley, Rachel, Jacob, and Mitchell, know how much he loved them and how he was always interested in what they were doing. I know that Dad would want to thank Gabby, Elena, and Ika, who have provided exceptional care to him and Mom in the recent years. He would also want to thank Bobby and David Smith for their many visits and to tell them how much their visits enriched his life and how important those were to him. No words can express how important, I can't express myself as to how much he loved you. We will all miss his understated, generous, kind, non-judgmental approach to life, his love for my mother and family, and his interest in those around him. He has been a role model, and it is not unusual for me to find myself using some of his favorite expressions. It's hard to imagine a world without him. He brought so much love and happiness to so many people, and he left the world a better place. Thank you.
We now call upon Ed's daughter, Beth.
Good morning. I am Beth Feldman, the third of my parents' 4 children. I'd also like to thank our family, friends, and our extended Allied Beverage Group family for being here, and also on the live stream. I know there's people on the live stream too, to honor our dad. My brother Rich just delivered a eulogy that was a collaboration by the 4 of us. As you heard, the business has been an integral part of our family for 3 generations, and so has the Altschuler family. Feldmans and Altschulers have been business partners since 1936. It is not unusual for someone to ask me if the Feldmans and Altschulers are related. Though we are not related, we have celebrated happy occasions and persevered through difficult times together for many decades. Our families have always had a special relationship. Jeffrey Altschuler worked with my father for over 45 years and asked that we deliver on his behalf his eulogy of my father. So in Jeffrey's words, unfortunately, circumstances make it impossible for me to be here today, but I would like to share a few thoughts and stories about Ed. Edward Feldman, everyone called him Eddie or Ed, was the personification of the saying, still waters run deep. Joining the family business in 1948, he followed in the footsteps of his older brother Mike, his father Max, and his uncle Isidore. It's never easy to work in a family business, but in Eddie's case, as the youngest in a group of strong personalities, it was doubly hard. While some family members were louder, more flamboyant, or gave off an aura of toughness, Eddie was always his own man. He was intellectually curious, cerebral, and courteous. He would contemplate a problem, looking at it from various aspects, and reflect on it before offering his opinion. Whether one agreed with it or not, his opinion was always well-reasoned. Ed possessed both a quiet dignity and at times a steely resolve. Ed started, directed, and grew our business in South Jersey. By doing so, he took on an important role while at the same time maintaining his independence within the family and to a great extent within the business. My first memories of Ed occurred over 45 years ago when I was new to the business. We were in Las Vegas for a Shenley convention. Shenley no longer exists, but they were an industry giant at the time. Tired of gambling during free time between meetings, Ed and I hired a car and went for a tour of the Hoover Dam. It was during these hours that I forged a bond with him that would last until his passing. At another national supplier meeting, this time in Orlando, he asked me if I was tired of lining up at the buffet table for dinner. So off we went to the USFL Orlando Renegade football game that night. We had a ball. If you notice a pattern here, there was, and these diversions were to be repeated quite a few times. If Ed saw a weakness, he was not loath to rub it in. For years, we had a ritual of my joining him in Philadelphia to watch the Eagles play the Giants. Even in years when they were good, the Giants usually lost, and I would hear about it for weeks. However, by way of consolation, his wife Ruth usually cooked a great dinner after the game. Eddie was a model of consistency. If he had wanted the notoriety, he could have been in the Guinness Book of World Records, most orders in a lifetime tuna for lunch. Being more attentive to detail than I, it was Ed and Mike who did the administrative paperwork and signed the ketubah at my wedding. Devoted to his family, he would proudly share the latest exploits of Richard and Marcy. As for Bruce, he would say, top secret. Ed only asked one thing of me in all our years together. It was early in our relationship, and the ask was, watch out for Beth. It didn't take long to tell him that she needed no help from me. As this is a PG family gathering, I will not disclose my favorite Eddie story here. If you know me well, reach out, and I will share it with you. Ed was a great son, husband, brother, father, and grandfather. He made time for anyone who needed his advice or assistance and gave freely of both. He was of the greatest generation, and his passing marks the end of an era for those who knew him in business and, more importantly, in life.
We now call upon Ben, Ed's nephew.
So in my line of work, I actually get to speak quite a bit, and usually it's easy. I never speak with notes, but recently I was interviewed, and I was asked about some of the experiences I've had throughout my life. And I think one thing that's been fortunate for me is that I'm a reflective person, and I can channel my talking heads and think about how did I get here. And for me, that reflection has brought me back to where I came from and the people who have influenced me. And I try to think about those things that really have left a mark. And I was once told, to those who much is given, much is expected. And I think about that because I've been given so much, and my uncle had a lot to do with that. He taught me about the value of hard work, and there were so many lessons that I just want to share a few of those with you. He gave me a lot of opportunities, and I can remember as a young child, he took me to a hockey game. So as a Flyers fan, we sat in the second row, and back in the 70s, as you might imagine, there was a fight. And the fight was literally right in front of us, 5 feet away. Two people just really going at it. And as you can imagine, the crowd is going wild, right? And there's cheers. And afterwards, again, for me, I was excited, but I looked at my uncle, and he gave me a smile and a shrug. And I see that often, and it's a wry smile. It's hard to describe, but that was sort of that piece that he would give me. And if I try and think about the words that would describe him, things like gentle, caring, kind, generous, calm, genuine, knowledgeable. But for me, the most important was that he was present. If I was talking to him, it felt like I was the most important person in the world to him, right then and there, always. And I could see that, when we would gather for Hanukkah parties, he would sit with my children and have that same almost intensity of caring about them and wanting to know about them. And that, for me, is a life lesson, to think about being with the person who you're talking with in that moment. And it's hard to explain how important that has been to me as I've lived my life, to try and be present in the moment, and something that I learned from him. And the value of family is another one of those lessons. For him to include myself and my family the way he did has been an incredible gesture, and I see it in his children. I see it in his children's spouses. I see it in his grandchildren. And knowing how important family is, like, those Seders feel like a reunion each year, a chance to reacquaint and to talk with people that you may not see that often. And I think, he understood and instilled in me that importance. And I can remember just after I had bought my first home, he and my aunt came to visit. And it meant so much for me to have them come really a long way to do that. But what struck me most was that he told me how proud he was of me. And again, that willingness to be open and share your feelings and be honest about that is another one of those gifts. He's been a role model to me. He's been a role model to my children, somebody that I can point to and say, this is who I want you to be. He's been a role model as a man, as a Jew, as a husband, and as a father. At the Seder just a few weeks ago, we had an opportunity, just the two of us, to speak. And it really took me all the way back to when he had first visited in my new home, because he told me how proud he was, again, of me and my family and all of us, and thanked me for coming all this way. And for me, it was an opportunity to thank him and to talk about the lessons that I had actually learned. And I was able to share just a few of those lessons with him. And I think that the legacy that he leaves lives in all of us. And I know that those lessons that he poured into me are things that will continue on. And so while he may be gone now, he actually lives forever in each of us. And I know for myself that I look at that and say, how can I carry on the tradition and honor his memory in the things that I do? So as his legacy lives on throughout all of us, I know for myself, I'm going to try to be the person that he was proud of and the person that he expected me to be in the best of times and in some of those worst of times. And so I just cherish the opportunity that I've had over the course of my lifetime to learn so many lessons from a great man.
And finally, we'll hear from two of Ed's grandchildren, first Jessica and then Jacob.
Hello, my name is Jessica. I am Edward's eldest granddaughter. Today, we gather not just in mourning, but in celebration of a life well lived. Seeing so many familiar faces here today, I can't help but think of Grandpa's love of family gatherings, especially Passover, which we recently celebrated with our extended family. As many of you know, my brother Matthew and I are a bit older than the rest of the grandchildren. I mean, not that much older, but still. So that also meant knowing two very different versions of my grandfather. First, the quintessential grandfather, a dedicated businessman at Allied Beverage who cherished spending time with his family and friends. And the second and more meaningful version was growing up and getting to know Edward, the complex and fascinating adult. His curiosity was infectious. He always wanted to learn about what I was doing, how I was doing it, and even if it meant enduring my work updates, he wanted to know how things were. He held many strong opinions, but his openness to new ideas was an inspiration. The other thing that I would be remiss to not mention is how much I learned about successful marriages from watching my grandparents' relationship. They were individuals who built a beautiful life and a loving home, a foundation for our entire family. Grandpa will be deeply missed, but his spirit and the echo of their bond will forever echo in his children and grandchildren. As a final anecdote, recently I mentioned that I was considering joining a synagogue to my grandfather, something he knew wasn't part of my upbringing. His classic reaction was, "Classic, Grandpa. Did you ask for a discount on the synagogue membership fees?" And now that I know there's a rabbi standing behind me, I feel bad about that. His humor, his love, his curiosity, these are the gifts he leaves us. Thank you all for being here today. Your presence honors a wonderful man and brings comfort to our family. Let us carry his memory in our hearts.
Lastly, we call upon Jacob.
My name is Jacob Desmond, and I am the son of Jeff Desmond and Beth Feldman, and I am one of the grandchildren. It isn't often in our lives that we come across someone so special that they stay with you forever, but I'm lucky enough to have had a grandpa who is that kind of person. I know many of us gathered here have good memories of him and with him, and today I want to share a few of the things I learned from him. Grandpa taught me the importance of making others feel valued and heard. He had an amazing ability to make those around him feel special. Every time I saw him, whether over Zoom Shabbats, weekend visits home, or the Jewish holidays, he would always ask about what I was learning in school that week. Or often, he would say, "So I read an article in the paper the other day," which would somehow remind him of me. He always saved those newspaper articles that he mentioned and would share them with me the next time I visited. And of course, he'd be wearing a baseball hat representing one of his grandchildren's colleges, or his alma mater, Penn. Through these gestures, he showed me the impact of staying connected with family, taking a genuine interest in the lives and interests of family members and friends, and being thoughtful and considerate of each person in your life. Grandpa also showed me the value and importance of family. Some of my earliest and fondest memories with him were from sleepovers I had at his and Grandma's house. Those weekends felt like vacations, although their home was just 30 minutes away. I remember him coming home from work and sitting around the dinner table with him and Grandma. Each night before bedtime, we would all hold hands across the bedroom and recite the Shema together. His unconditional love for his family and his unwavering devotion to Grandma were testaments to his character, and showed me that love is not just a feeling that can be expressed with words, but also demonstrated through actions. Another quality I feel Grandpa instilled in me is the importance of tradition. For as long as I can remember, he was a catalyst for bringing generations of family together from each of his brothers each year at the Passover Seder. And each year, we'd spend a week together on summer trips as a family. He seemed immensely proud of his commitment. He seemed immensely proud of his commitment to maintaining such special traditions that fostered a sense of belonging and continuity, setting an example for multiple generations. His dedication to the family and Jewish traditions will leave a lasting impact on me. As we gather to remember and celebrate my grandfather, I am so grateful for the lessons he taught me in the past 25 years.
In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. I invite you to please rise for our memorial prayer of El Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Esther ben Mordechai vechana Shehalach le'olamo. Baal harachamim yastirehu b'seter kenafav le'olamim. V'yitzror b'yitzror hachaim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Edward Feldman, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he now rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. I invite you to please be seated. Interment will follow our chapel service at Locust Wood Memorial Park in Cherry Hill. The family will be observing Shiva at 108 Oakmont Drive in Morristown today from 7 until 9, tomorrow Thursday from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9, and Friday 2 to 4. There will also be a meal of condolence following interment.